Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here with my recent reads. I know, again, it's been a long time since I've done one of these. I've hit a really, really bad slump. One of the worst slumps I've had in a long time. I've barely been reading at all. I'm lucky to get 10 pages a night. So unfortunately, I haven't been reading a lot. But I've gotten through a few things. These are all from around like February to now. That's how long it's taken me to get through these 4 books. And they're not very long books, so it gives you some idea. But anyway, I want to make these because some of these are library books. I have to return them. Anyway, here we go. I'm sorry if this is rambly and unfocused. My videos usually are. Whatever. Let's get into it. So first I have this. This is St. Peter's Wolf by Michael Cadnum. Was just a really old 80s paperback that I found at a paperback store. This is going ages, but this is almost like 10 years ago now I bought this. And it's just always been sitting on my shelf. It's a zebra horror. That was why I got it. If it focuses. No, we're not going to do that. Okay. Yeah, it's a zebra horror. So, you know, I always made it a point of buying a bunch of those when I first found out about them. This is one of them. You know, as I say, I've been in a bit of a slump, and I was like, oh, werewolves. Werewolves are always like, you know, a perennial favorite. So, you know, pick one up, give it a try. And it's been sitting on my shelf for a long time, so unfortunately, this was disappointing. So this takes place in San Francisco, and it's about this psychiatrist named Benjamin Bird, who also moonlights as an art collector. He's really into, you know, artifacts and things like that. And he's having kind of a tough time of it. His wife is divorcing him for his fellow colleague psychiatrist, who's like much more rich and who's much richer and more attractive. He's trying to deal with her son, who's, you know, his son. Who's like very emotionally troubled, and he's struggling with, you know, getting his, you know, behavioral issues fixed, you know, so his whole life is kind of crumbling apart. But then he meets this mysterious woman after accidentally hitting her dog with his car. I know. And through that, he ends up meeting another famous art collector who gives him this set of silver fangs that are they're cast in silver, and if I remember rightly, it's not shown here, but I think there's actually symbols carved into the teeth. And they exert this mysterious power over him, and you can probably guess what that power ends up being. This started off where I was like, I thought this was okay. I looked up the author, and apparently he also was a poet, or is a poet. I think he's still around. He's a poet, and you can kind of feel that kind of coming through, where there's a lot of sort of heightened language and stuff, and I struggled with it because, you know, I love a good bit of poetic prose, but it's tough to pull off. And I feel like he didn't quite thread the needle here. You know, he hits like some really nice, like sort of poetic highs where you're like, ooh, that's pretty. You know, that's a nice turn of phrase. You know, that was pretty good. And then other times, it'll just be like, it just comes off kind of like robotic and like emotionally detached, which kind of took me out of the book because obviously, like, the whole point of it is that, you know, the main character, he's emotionally stunted, he's struggling in life, and then through his, you know, activities of being a werewolf and the changes that the teeth bring out in him, you know, he's sort of embracing his bestial side and becoming, you know, sexier and more, you know, and more successful and stuff like that. You know, typical werewolf stuff. They explored that in, like, Wolf with Jack Nicholson, you know what I mean? It's not exactly an unusual theme, but it's supposed to be, you know, sort of like passionate and emotional, you know, and I think that's what he's going for most of the time, but then a lot of times, because it's written in that very heightened language, you know, so you feel like I'm supposed to be feeling very sort of like passionate about this and melodramatic, you know, because that's what he's going through, but the way it's written, it's almost like it's very, like, cold and emotionally detached, and I don't know if that was intentional, but for me, it didn't really work. One thing that I did like about the book is that he took it in some unusual directions. Like, there was this review on Goodreads that was like, I thought I knew where the story of this book was going to go, and then, you know, at the point where most of these types of stories stop, it kept going, you know, and I agree with that, and I thought that was interesting, but at the same time, he throws so much at the wall, and it gets to a point where it's like ridiculous and just like, I think it mentions Interview with a Vampire on the back here, and I think it's trying to go for that sort of a very heightened poetic sort of exploration of what it means to be a werewolf, which I'm all for. I would love that, but I don't think he threaded the needle here. There's also some really not great subplots regarding some of the things that the main character does as a werewolf that we're then expected to kind of forgive him for. And that was another kind of point of contention with me, is that I'm all for having, you know, dark, unlikable characters, And I thought that's what this was kind of going for, and I think it is. He's meant to be flawed, obviously, but like some of the things he does, like are pretty reprehensible, and then he doesn't really face any like repercussions for it, and like everything sort of turns out fine for him. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I just thought it was really ridiculous, and it really just took me out of the book. And from that point on, I was just kind of like skeptical about it. And there's another thing where like yes, as I mentioned, like yes, it didn't necessarily go places I expected it to, but at the same time, the places that it went were never really fully explored in a way that I would have liked. And by the end of the book, it gets into this weird, like, pseudo metaphysical, sort of like Jack London-esque type thing about like the beauty and the wildness of nature and stuff like that. And I don't know, like it just felt very overblown, and it went from like a horror novel to like this sort of like very almost like spiritual thing, and like it just didn't really work for me, which is really frustrating because I thought it was a great concept. I loved the concept of the Fang, that was what drew me to it. I love like artifacts that like curse people and change them and stuff, but the Fangs are just kind of an afterthought. They're just the MacGuffin to kind of kick the plot along to, like it could be anything. Like if he gets bitten by a werewolf or whatever, like none of it, the fact that it's like an artifact and that he's an artifact collector and all this stuff, it doesn't really feature into anything except for bits where the author kind of shows off a bunch of his historical and cultural knowledge, which I feel like that is what that was about. And yeah, he captures that very sort of literate, high-end sort of Bay Area society style very well, but at a certain point it's just like, I don't know. I just didn't find a lot of the characters likable or unlikable in an interesting way. I'll say that, because I don't have a problem with unlikable characters, but they have to be interesting, they have to make sense, I have to be willing to follow them through their story, and I didn't feel that way about this. So yeah, I don't know. It was very disappointing. Not the worst thing I've ever read, but, based on the fact that it was like sitting on my shelf for 10 years, it was hardly a hidden gem, which is a little sad, but there you go. That happens sometimes with these, don't it? Next, I read an anthology. This is 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is a Scholastic book that's... Come on, focus. 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is part of Scholastic's Point Horror series. This was, because that was kind of the thing that a lot of people did back then, when you had like sort of there were a lot of those horror imprints that released like anthologies and stuff. Like there was the Del Abyss meta horror collection and stuff like that. It almost serves as like a mission statement. So this is 13 horror stories, all written by famous Scholastic horror authors, including, of course, R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, and a few other sort of smaller luminaries like Caroline B. Cooney and Ellen Emerson White and people like that. Diane Ho, I think, wrote a bunch of stuff for Point Horror. Point Horror, as you might imagine, is not necessarily the most literary masterpieces. It's not a collection of the most literary masterpieces out there, but they're usually good for a laugh. Christopher Pike is always a lot of fun. So I figure, and I like anthologies, I like short stories, so I figure, like, why not? It'll be good for a laugh. And this kind of sucked, I'm sorry to say. The main thing, is that a lot of the stories just were goofy, and I can accept that to some extent with, young adult horror, with like middle grade horror, I can accept some goofiness, but like, just goofiness to the point where it was like bad and like, just not in like a fun way. It was just, rather than being so bad it's good, it was just bad, And it's not that it's like terribly written or anything, obviously it's very simplistic writing for the most part, but the thing that I felt about most of the stories in this collection is that either they were like retreading old ground that I'd seen a million times before, like a haunted doll or something like that, or it was like trying really, really hard to be edgy, but its idea of edgy was just like so cornball and stupid, that it just made it laughable. So like, for example, there was a story in here. So the story in here by like Christopher Pike it's called Collect Call. And I was really excited about that because I love Christopher Pike. Like, from what I've read of him, I really enjoy his books, because even if they're not like the greatest like stories or plots or whatever in the world, like, he always like swings for the fences, and he goes places I never expect YA authors from this era to go, and his plots are always so bizarre. So I was really excited about that. and it was just lame. So like, it's about this girl who meets this guy at a party, and and he's your typical like bad boy. He wears like leather jackets and sunglasses, and he smokes cigarettes. I pictured like Andrew Eldritch from Sisters of Mercy, and she talks to him, and he says all this stuff about like, oh, like the Black Rider and stuff like that, and and he will see you soon and stuff like that. And she's like, oh, like I don't know what he's saying, but it's so poetic and dreamy. And he's like, oh, like I don't listen to like mainstream artists, and he gives her this tape of this guy that he calls the Black Rider. I believe it's the Black Rider. The Black Walker. Sorry, yeah, the Black Walker. And it's described as this sort of like synthy, like goth music, and it's like really terrifying. It like touches something deep in her soul. And there's some example lyrics. The music came on, dark, sensual synthesizers, a drum machine in tune with a disembodied spirit, then a haunting voice as cold as gray snow and as deep as a forgotten well. Powerful stuff. I come from the past. I eat the night. I knew you when you were young. I tell you my story, but I sleep with a gun. This is my night. This is your night. I'm a Black Walker, babe. Touch me softly and you get a fright. The stars are holes in the sky. The moon is a thorn in the dark. It drips white light. Give me the knife. Let's cut out our eyes. Yeah, this is our night. This is what's right. I'm a Black Walker, babe. Brush my lips and I bleed you white. Wow, Caroline whispered when the song was done. She pushed the stop button. That's a great song. So, I mean, like, it's trying so hard to be like, ooh, this is, like, spooky and mysterious, and it's just so lame. And the disappointing thing about it is that where it goes isn't even half as crazy as, like, the least crazy Christopher Pike stuff I've usually read, so that was really disappointing. And then another one of these, like, stories called Blood Kiss is literally just, like, there was a guy at my school who I thought was a vampire, and he turns out to be an actual vampire, and like they kind of put a little twist on it, but it's just very like, okay, like I've seen this plot a million times before, but they're presenting it as if it's like, whoa, this is like this crazy plot twist. And I guess I could see how, like, if you were a kid, you might have, like, really liked that, especially because, like, it's a bit naughty, there's, like, talk about, like, necking and stuff, making out and, like, being flirty and that type of thing, But overall, it was pretty disappointing. There were a couple stories that I liked. There was one in here that I really, really liked. So yeah, it's actually the second to last story in here. It's The Boy Next Door by Ellen Emerson White. And I actually really, really enjoyed that one. So that's about this girl who's like working at like an ice cream shop, and she's about to close up. And then this guy that she kind of knows from school, but not really well, comes in and starts talking to her. And he basically says like, "Hey, I'm going to kill you." And she's like, funny joke, and he's like, no, I'm actually going to kill you. I've been thinking about killing someone for a long time. And she's like, why? And he's like, I just want to know what it feels like. So she has to like work her way out of this, terrifying situation. And I actually really, really liked that. It was really tense. It was almost like a two-person play, the interplay between the two characters as they're kind of trying to outsmart each other, It was very dialogue driven. It was actually really, really good. There is a pretty lame twist, unfortunately, that kind of sullies it a little bit. But that was far and away my favorite story in the collection. So yeah, I need to find more Ellen Emerson White stuff out there. So, but yeah, generally this was just kind of disappointing, which again was also disappointing coming after St. Peter's Wolf. But again, these things happen. And then next I read this book, The Tulip Touch by Anne Fine. This cover really doesn't communicate what this book is really like. So I found out about this because I read about it on Grady Hendrix's newsletter. He does this sort of Paperbacks from Hell thing where it's not every month. I mean, I think he tries to do every month, but he's a busy guy. So, but he posts reviews of like old horror paperbacks and stuff that he's read. And he mentioned this, and he said, like, this was a total surprise. I'd never heard of this author. I'd never gave two thoughts about this book. It had just been sitting on my shelf for years and years and years, I gave it a try, and it, like, blew me away. So I was like, damn, okay, I actually and he recommended this, and I'm going to recommend it too. If that intrigues you at all, go and read this book. Don't look up anything about it. Just get it from the library like I did, or buy a copy, and, yeah, don't spoil yourself, because for me, like, it was one of those things where the less I knew going in, the better it was. But anyway, for those of you who just want a little taste. So this is about a young girl named Natalie, and she's her father works as a manager of a hotel, and they've just moved to this big hotel, that he's agreed to be manager of, so she's moved into this new place, meeting all these people. and she meets this this other young girl named Tulip, who lives just across the way from her in sort of this like dank sort of abusive home. And she's a bit weird, and and she's always like kind of making up stories about herself and other people and things. But they get along really well, and they become really, really close friends. And the story just goes into this very deep, powerful, passionate friendship between these two young girls, and the consequences of that friendship. I really don't want to spoil too much about this. I just want to say, like, the thing that surprised me about this book was it's not necessarily one of those things where it's really like horrifying because it's like, it's disturbing because it's full of like graphic violence or whatever, like it's more the nature of the psyche that it explores and stuff, and sort of the callousness of it, and not only that, but the way that it sort of assigns a lot of the blame for that psyche, to society. I know I'm being vague. This was such a good book. I mean, I totally was floored by it. I agreed with Grady's review, like 100%. None of this is communicated by this cover. This is the lamest cover for this book. But this is not at all what you would expect from this like slim YA book about a friendship between two girls. The places that it goes to. The dark corners of the psyche. The things that it pulls out and shows to us and kind of tells us, like you made this, I don't know. It just really shook me. I was shocked how good it was, and just how angry it was too. I mean, this is a very angry book, but it's a very slow burning, simmering anger. It just sitting under the surface. Yeah, it just blew me away. I again, sorry, I don't want to spoil anything about it, but I just want to keep talking about it as well. So, but hopefully, my excitement and my little description there will pique your interest. If you can find this, yeah, give it a read. I mean, this was 5 stars all the way. I'm so glad I read this. A real big pickup after these disappointing previous 2. So yeah, check that out if you can. It's super short. This copy's only like 150 pages. You can read it in like a couple of hours. It's great. Find it, read it. It's awesome. And then finally, another library book here. I've been trying to get through my library books. This is Dear Committee Members by Julie Schumacher. Sorry. This is another one I just heard about randomly. I actually heard about this when I was in England, and I was listening to BBC Radio, and they have this show on there called A Good Read, where the host and 2 randomly selected guests just talk. They each take turns talking about a book they read recently that they enjoyed, and it's usually books that are like easily available in like paperback, or you can get them at the library or whatever. Because the idea is that we're selecting a good read for you, and this is one of the books that. One of the I think it was a guest or the host, I can't remember, but this is one of the books they picked, and it just sounded really interesting. So this is about a professor of creative writing and literature named Jason Fitger. He's teaching at this like liberal arts school in the Midwest called Payne University, as a lot of liberal arts schools do, especially in smaller areas, less well-funded areas, they struggle. And the book is presented as a series of letters of recommendation, and other sort of correspondences written from him to like students, other professors, job applicants, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's an epistolary novel that's just that uses these letters to explore a semester in the life of this creative writing professor. And I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. Not earth-shattering or anything, but it was just it's one of those very pleasant sort of dry, sort of humorous reads that I enjoy from time to time. Especially because I really enjoy reading about academia. I didn't really go to college. I went to a little bit of community college, but sort of the culture and the atmosphere of academia is something that's always like both repelled and attracted me in its various ways. And this is one of those books that does a pretty good job of skewering sort of the day-to-day lives of people in this world. The main character, Jason, he's as a lot of creative writing professors are, he's a struggling novelist where, he published a first novel that was really, really successful, but it kind of drove him away from his wife and stuff. And none of his other novels after that were as successful. So there's a lot of sort of hemming and hawing about that, about, sort of the ways that your career has gone, and the way that you can sort of sell yourself out for your art. And it's also sort of satirizing, not only academia but sort of like literary culture, because everybody, claims to know, agents and literary editors and all this stuff, the heads of some big publishing house, and they can get you in touch, but really, it's all smoke and mirrors, So it's just very dryly funny. The writing style that she gives Jason Fittger, it's as you might expect from a creative writing professor. He's very sort of florid and erudite, and he has a problem sort of keeping his word count down. He's a yapper. There's a recurring gag in the book that I really liked where it shows it's like a digital form of like him typing in for a letter of recommendation for somebody. They have like the limited amount of characters, so he gets on one of his little tangents and then it just stops halfway, and then at one point he just starts like cursing out in each box, like this fucking thing, I can't type out all everything I want to say. So there's stuff like that. One of the things I really liked about it as well is that it becomes pretty clear that Jason's a very unreliable narrator, because he struggles throughout the book to get a student of his, Darren Broyles. He's trying to get him recognized for this book that he's writing that's like a retelling of Bartleby the Scrivener, and and he spends like the entire book like trying to keep prop him up and like get him out there. He tries to get him like suggested for a fellowship, and that falls through and everything. It's like, they're all doing this to get back at me because my ex-wife is on the the board. She's a chair member. And she selects who gets the grants and the fellowships and stuff. So she's doing this to spite me. Whereas like really maybe the guy's novel just isn't very good. And a few people tell him that throughout the book, and he just like refuses to believe it. He just thinks they're all out to get him. And so it's like that ego of like thinking that everybody still gives a shit about you and that you wield some kind of like power over people that you really don't. So yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. There is sort of like a last act turn of events that really surprised me that I don't think was entirely successful. There was a bit too much tonal whiplash there, and I felt we hadn't spent enough time sort of building out these characters to really take us to this point. But it was just a light, fun read. It was short. It was like 180 pages, which, again, with this horrible slump that I'm in, shorter reads have been doing me really well. So, it was just a light, fun, sort of breezy read. If you like books about like academia and sort of poking fun at like the literary cognoscenti and that kind of thing, which, as I often do, I would highly recommend that. It was a lot of fun. So, yeah. So, those are all the books that I've been reading. Again, I'm still working on the vlog. I need to take some time out to do all the audio and stuff, so that's my issue. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you guys soon, hopefully. Until then, bye.